In this video, you will learn how to use the basic operations of the calculator, which are addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. You will also learn how to use the editing keys, the insert key, the delete key, and the entry key. First, you will see the different ways to express multiplication in the calculator. Let's take a look at three different examples. The most basic one, we're going to look at simply 2, then multiplied by 5. You would then hit the enter key, which is equivalent to an equal key, to get our result. So you can see that 2 multiplied by 5 is equal to 10. So let's look at another way to express multiplication. So that's 2, and then we're going to use the parenthesis keys to represent multiplication. So we multiply by 5 and then close the parenthesis, and this represents 2 times 5, and then we hit the enter key to get our result. And then the last way that we can represent multiplication is simply using two grouping symbols, or two parentheses. So we'll start out by taking 2 and close the parenthesis, and then the left-hand parenthesis times 5, and then we close it. So here we have 2 multiplied by 5 in this representation, and then we hit enter. And you can see that all three of these examples here are going to be representing multiplication, and it's verified here that they're all the same because our answers are all 10 for each one of them. So just remember that there are three different possible ways that you can represent multiplication. We could also put the parenthesis here on the 2 and then leave it off the 5. We could also do that. Okay, so let me go ahead and clear the screen here. Now let's do a simple computation involving addition and multiplication. So first, let's go ahead and take 5 plus 2 multiplied by 3. And we are going to hit enter to get our answer. So here, let's go ahead and see what happened. The calculator actually took 2 times 3, which is 6, and then added it to the 5, which is 11. So what that tells us is that the calculator actually uses the order of operations. The order of operations are parentheses, exponents, multiplication or division from left to right, and addition or subtraction from left to right. This rule is commonly referred to as PEMDAS, which is an acronym for Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally. So as you recall, you're supposed to do multiplication before addition. So just remember that your calculator actually takes the order of operations into consideration. Let's go ahead and take a look at another example here. Let's take the opposite of, so we're going to go ahead and use this here. This is not the subtraction key. This is the key that you would use to make a negative number. So we hit that key, use the left-hand grouping symbol, and then we're going to take 3, subtract 2 times 5, then close the expression. Now what do you think this is going to be? Well, if our order of operations holds, which it does, that's 2 times 5, which is 10. So 3 subtract 10 is going to be a negative 7. And then the opposite of a negative 7 is going to be a positive 7. So let's see what happens here. We hit enter, and indeed we get a positive 7. Okay, let's take a look at one more example. Again, if we're going to use a negative number, we need to go ahead and use this key, not the subtraction key. So we want negative 10 divided by 2 subtract 3. Okay, what do you think this will be? Well, let's take a look here. Remember that order of operations holds true. So this is going to do the division first, so negative 10 divided by 2 is a negative 5, and then negative 5 subtract 3 would be negative 8. So we hit enter and we get negative 8 for our answer. So these are just a few examples here of inserting some basic operations. We inserted here multiplication, addition, we had some subtraction, we have division here, and then we also inputted some negative values. Okay? The main thing you want to remember is you want to represent negative values or negative numbers with this key right here. You'll get an error if you use the subtraction key, and that was covered in a previous video. So let's clear the screen. Now let's take a look at how to use the editing keys in case you need to fix some values or an operation in your computation. First, we're going to look at the use of the arrow keys. So let's enter a simple operation such as 32 subtract 16. And all of a sudden you realized I needed to make this a 26 instead of a 16. As all you would have to do is go to the arrow keys and move the arrow key to the left and then just basically type over that 1 to a 2. So now you have the correct operation, 32 minus 26, and then you can go ahead and hit enter to get your result. Okay, so it's very simple. Now let's take a look at the use of the insert key. Let's look at another example like 80 plus 250. That's 80 plus 250. And you realize that you wanted 800 plus 250. So you think you might be able to use the arrow key like we did before and bring it over to the left and then go ahead and hit the 0. The problem is, look what happened. The 0 typed over the plus sign. So you can't do that. What we want is we want to use the insert key, this key right here. So let's go ahead and clear the screen. And let's enter in again 80 plus 250. And then you realize, oh, this should be 800. So we can go ahead and use the arrow key and then bring it to where you want to fix the value. So we know we're going to insert a 0 there. So we need to hit the second function key, and then which is going to operate that insert if we hit this button. So now let's go ahead and hit the 0. And you can see now that the 0 was inserted and the addition operation is still there. So we go ahead and hit enter to get our result. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the use of the delete key. So let's enter in another computation, but first we'll clear the screen. So let's take 15 divided by 30 times 4. Okay? And then you realize that, oh, you didn't want 30, you actually wanted 3. So what we need to do is we need to use the delete key. This is very simple. You move the cursor to the place you want to delete and then hit the delete key. And that gets rid of the 0. Now we have the correct computation, and then we hit enter to get our value. And you can see order of operations hold true here. It did the division first, which is 5, and then multiplied by 4, which is 20. Okay, now let's look at the use of the insert and delete key together. So let's clear the screen. And let's look at 48 divided by 2, subtract 3, multiplied by 15. What we actually want is the 15 to become a 5 and the 2 to become a 12. So the first thing we can do is let's go ahead and just delete this 1 here. So we'd hit delete, and now we just have the 5 remaining, and then we move it over to the left again till we get to the 2. And what's going to happen is when we use the insert key, it's going to insert a 1 to the left of the 2. So let's go second function, insert, and then type in 1. So now we have 48 divided by 12, subtract 3 times 5. And we go ahead and hit enter to get our result. The last key we're going to look at is the entry key, which is located right down here. Now what that does, it's a really neat feature. It'll allow you to go back and look at all the different keystrokes that you've done in the calculator. So let's clear the screen here. And just remember this operation right here. See if you can remember that in your head. Okay, so let's clear the screen. So let's enter a computation. We will start by selecting the left-hand parenthesis and take 21 divided by 3, 21 divided by 3, subtract 8, and then add 1 to that. Now close the parenthesis, and then we're going to multiply that by this other operation, negative 10. Remember, we use this for the negative values, divided by 20. Okay. And then we go ahead and hit enter. We say 0, and we think that, oh, that's kind of a funny number. And then we look back at our computation here, and we realize that we want to go ahead and make this an 11. That should be an 11, not 1. And then this should be a 2, not 20. So we need to change this just to a 2. So instead of typing in the whole computation again, what we can do is we can use the entry key, which is this key right here. You have to use the second function button to get to it. So if we hit second function and then press this key to operate the entry, then we have our computation back. It's the same one that we have up here. So now we can use our editing keys. So we'll use our arrow, and we want to make this over here, like we said, an 11. So let's hit the second function and insert key, and then we're going to type in a 1. So now we have 11, and then we're going to get rid of the 0 and make it a 2. So we'd highlight the 0, and then we just hit delete. And now we can hit enter to get our result. And the result is negative 50, and that was a little bit more reasonable of an answer. You thought that it might come out to be something like this. So you can always go back to any previous computation by simply using the entry key. In fact, let's go ahead and hit that key a few times. Second function, entry. So it gives us back our last computation we did. Second function, entry again. Then it goes back to this one, and then second function, entry again. Then it just goes back to the previous example. And then if we keep hitting those keys, it keeps going back to the various computations. And that's just a really handy feature that you can just keep going back to different computations. This concludes the video on basic calculations and editing.